This is really an extraordinary reading that we have this morning. It's probably the highest teaching, both on our path, but in all religions. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else will be added unto thee. And that seek ye first. And Krishna says it just so beautifully, as he always does, just sort of gently and in his own way. Those who worship lesser gods go to lesser gods. Those who worship me come to me. They're just such powerful words. Again, a very high teaching, and of course, a very hard teaching, because the demand is that you're always able, or the implicit statement, every time you put me there, you put me first, I'll be there. And to have the faith, the extraordinary faith that we can do that and not feel that we need to be taking care of everything in this world. Because if we're in this world, taking care of everything in this world, as Krishna says, those are the lesser gods, and that's exactly what we're going to get. I had so much fun last night, really, just thinking about this sermon and preparing for it, because I got to read this chapter again in the Autobiography of a Yogi, which Swamiji just presents to us now in a few sentences. But it's an extraordinary chapter. It's an extraordinary story for many reasons, and it also raises the question of why Yogananda, in his autobiography, shares so many of these stories with us, so many miracles. So first I was asking myself, what is a miracle? Really, what is a miracle? I remember when Thich Nhat Hanh said, miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong. And that was many years ago, before I could really even begin to understand it, never mind have some experiences of it. But now, and I still find it hard to find the words to put behind it, but what we call miracles happen when we are perfectly in tune with God, when we are seeking God first. God knows that, and he knows exactly what we need in the moment, and miracles happen. But this is, and the miracle is that pure love of God, just resting in that moment where anything is possible, and we're exactly what we need, because we're with God. Nothing outside of what we need can happen, and nothing outside of what we're seeking in the purest places of our heart. I wanted to read one, actually I hope if I remember to come back to it, I'll read two passages to you from this also really just a remarkable book called Letters by a Modern Mystic. It's a diary that was kept by a man whose name is Frank Laubach, many decades ago, as he went off to the Philippines, many of the islands. He was meeting the different people, their different religious practices, and he basically went to convert them. But suffice it to say, what happened in his life over the period of a year is that he had the deepest conversion himself. He quit trying to convert people very early on, and he saw that the way to be with the people, to share what he wanted to share, which was the love of God, was to go deep inside and find that love himself. And he embarked on a journey. I decided that I'd like to do a day-long workshop, and I will at some point soon, on this book. Otherwise, I could just read you the whole book, which would be a wonderful way to spend the morning together, but I'm not going to do that. But it's just remarkable the way he shares the progression of that and how hard it is to decide to always be seeking God first. That's why I said it's an extraordinarily high teaching, but it's also an equally hard teaching. It's the path that we're on. Of course, we need to keep trying to do that. But he puts so beautifully that notion that really what we treasure in this world, what we're seeking, that's where our heart goes. And if it's a quote-unquote lesser God, which for most of us means money, but can often mean the perfect relationship or finding the perfect anything or being just so busy out in the world taking care of everything because we either don't really believe or we forget that God's there and he would do it for us if we created space in our lives and if we could remember to let him in. But we get really worried, even those of us who are trying so hard, we go so long, and then this fear comes in. Maybe God forgot. Maybe it's not going to happen. Or maybe it's not going to happen the way I wanted it to happen. So I'll just step out and take care of it just to be sure. And we all do that in so many ways. And then we've lost our faith, we've lost that belief, and we are truly worshiping the lesser gods. I had a very, actually beautiful and meaningful conversation with a couple of people who are friends of mine and who I love dearly, part of this path, who were talking to me about what it means to stay on the path. And if they've particularly developed close relationships with a few people, what happens when those people leave? What is the path then? And what about life? And what if I really do want to work at the best company and make a lot of money? And what if, and all the what ifs that go along, they're very reasonable questions. And there's just, the answer seemed hard, but fortunately they knew I loved them, and it was not with judgment or harshness, but simply saying we all get to make choices every moment of every day. And the choice is always, is this going to take me closer to God, or will it take me away from God? How much effort will I put into knowing God, to being a part of this community? How much effort will I be able to make to stay steadfast on my path? The other night I was giving a class on, it's part of this essentials class that I'm doing, but the topic was loyalty. And it would be very easy to turn that class into this sermon because it is a lot about loyalty. But Swamiji made a very interesting statement that I shared in the class. And that is, he said, if you try and have your 2 feet in one of 2 boats, that is, I'm going to make everything happen here in the world. I want a lot in the world, and I'm going to make it happen. And over here, but I really want to be close to God. Those are 2 feet in 2 boats. Swami Kriyananda, you will inevitably fall in and you will drown. He didn't say you'd fall in the water and you'd get wet. He said you'll fall in and you'll drown. He's saying, spiritually speaking, that's death. That's death to our spiritual path. Those are hard choices, and we know that. But this is Swamiji himself saying, don't try it. We're here to really do all we can in this life to get ourselves on that path, just like Frank Laubach did, remembering more and more moments, and he adds moments as the year goes by. He's able to. First he says, I'm going to start off trying to remember God a few minutes a day. And he realized how hard it was, and he talked about it. He says, Frank Laubach, who's a very high saint, he said, I know I'm probably one of the laziest people. He's constantly finding those qualities within himself that are keeping him from God. And he writes it so that forever we're going to be able to read how he failed, why he failed, but also how steadfast he was in his search. I'll just share with you these ideas, just keep coming, but I am going to read from this book eventually. I heard Ananda say once that Swamiji writes a letter he wrote a letter every year at New Year's. He's probably still writing them, only we have to listen harder. It's a little more difficult now to hear his instruction. But he wrote a letter at New Year's, and he gave us, here's what I'd like you to try for this next year. And one of those years, he wrote a letter. He was somewhere in seclusion for almost the year writing. I forget where he was, and the instruction was, I'd like you to think about God for 5 consecutive minutes every day. And when Ananda told this story, she said, most of us had been here 20 years, probably. So I thought, not me, Ananda, as did many people probably, oh, that's easy, I do it anyway. And then she actually tried to think about God and hold God's presence within her for 5 consecutive minutes. And she said, I had an 8-minute walk to work and an 8-minute walk home. It takes me more than 5 minutes to do the dishes. She went on and on. It was adorable, but it was deep. And she said, I'd get 1 minute, and then I'd be thinking about what was going to happen at work. Or she listed many things. Doesn't matter. We all know it. This is what's being asked of us is difficult, but it's essential. Otherwise, what are we really doing on this path? But here's the first thing I wanted to read to you. This is early on in his year. He said, and what I was mentioning before, that Swamiji said about loyalty, you can't have one of each foot in 2 boats, that really what we treasure is where our heart goes, that we can't be wanting 2 things. Everything other than God is mutually exclusive of God. That's really the point, everything. So he says, one cannot worship God and Mammon for the reason that God slips out and is gone as soon as we try to seat some other unworthy affection beside him. That can be anything other than him. The other idol stays and God vanishes, not because God is a jealous God, but because sincerity and insincerity are contradictions and cannot both exist at the same time in the same place. That's pretty extraordinary, sincerity and insincerity. And that just means God, in his language and what he was doing, and in this reading, and everything else. So he just puts it like that. Now, I also wanted to get back to, just came back into my mind, how great this story really is. And when I went back and I read the chapter, because and many of us know the story, but I'll just summarize it for those of you who don't. But Paramhansa Yogananda, when he was a boy, had his older brother, Ananda, who felt that everything he was pursuing, which was all about God, was foolishness. And he kept saying to him, you're going to get over it, you're going to get over it. He kept trying to forbid him to follow his path. And Yogananda constantly just stayed very clear and very calm about it. Whatever Ananda would say to him, now is the time to make money, you'll have time for God later. And then Master would say, as a little boy, not how I see it. How I see it is now's the time for God, and money may come later. It was just everything Ananda said. So Ananda challenged him to go on this journey, to go from Agra up to Vrindavan, without taking any money, without asking anybody for anything, to go up there to eat, that is, get train tickets, eat all day, and then find your way back. And it's a beautiful story, and I can't tell the whole story. But of course, Master says, no problem, because he does have the faith that God will, of course, show up for him, because he has faith, because he knows it beyond a doubt. It will manifest. And he takes his friend, Jitendra, with him. And Jitendra is just perfect in this story, because everything that's true about life comes out in this story. So Jitendra is not so sure. At the last minute, he says to Ananda, maybe better just give me a few coins, so if it doesn't go right, I can call you. And Master looks at him, Jitendra, he'll have none of it. They are going without money. But Jitendra's faith is not what Master's is. Although he was committed and wanted to know God, probably like many of us, but that level of faith. So the first thing that happens is a man comes up to them on the train, just intuitively recognizes who Yogananda is again. He's a little boy. And he says, you two look like you've run away from home and you're hungry. And Master steadfast, he says, no, he's going to play by the rules. But the man winds up taking them to a home as soon as they get off the train, where he was supposed to be delivering two princes, not princess, but two princes, for this grand lunch. But the princes couldn't make it. Something deterred them. So Yogananda and Jitendra sit down, not just like, here's some toast or cereal or whatever. No, this was a meal fit for a king. And they ate this beautiful meal, and Jitendra says to Master, oh, now I see, now I believe in God, now I got it. But they go out, and they're wandering around the streets a little bit, and he's very worried that they're not going to get home. And he starts worrying again. Within an hour less, Jitendra's worried. And really, doesn't that just sound like us? So here's the beauty of the faith and the belief in God. And right alongside it is the doubt, the questioning, and the extraordinary forgetfulness. How easy it is to forget that God is there for us. They just had this meal. God himself just fed them, but they could not hold on to it. And then this man approaches them, and he walks right up to Yogananda, who's a kid, and says, you're my guru. I recognize you. I've dreamt about you. And he not only takes them to the train station, he shows them around Vrindavan. I was just in India. Everything's said differently there, so the words collided in my head. But he takes them on this tour. He shows them. He said, let me show you these special places where Krishna has hallowed these grounds, because it's the city of Krishna, of course. And he takes them on a tour. He buys them train tickets, and he sends them home with all of these rupees. And then Jitendra says again, oh, now I see it. How could I have doubted? But the minute they get home and off the train, Jitendra says to Master, I have to rush home and be with my family. Again, another instance of what Master says, being drawn to that familial warmth. It's really remarkable. There's Yogananda, and there's most of us who are seeking, but who find it very hard to hold on to it. And of course, the beautiful end of the story is that when Master gets home, Ananda looks at him, and this beautiful line that Yogananda wrote, or Ananda said, "Now I see that the chain of demand and supply, not supply and demand, but demand, goes much deeper than I thought. When we ask for God to be present, it's endless. It's into infinity." That's what Master says. There is no end. You simply move into that level of consciousness where you see the endlessness of it all. And that's what Ananda was saying. And Ananda insisted that he give him Kriya initiation. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And another miracle, I mean, the AY is filled with miracles, filled, but these amazing lessons in life. Here's what happens if you do. Here's what doubt and fear look like. Master had a sister, Roma, again, a story that most of us know. She came to Master one day and said, "My husband is so worldly. He's so caught up in everything. He has no faith, no belief. Can you talk to him?" And Master basically says, "I can do better than that." He says, "Why don't we spend a day? We'll go over to the temple." Suddenly I'm blocking on the name of the temple. I'm sorry. The Kali temple. What is the name of it? Dakshineshwar. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Just couldn't bring it up. He said, "Let's go there and we'll worship there." And Rome is saying he's not going to worship. He doesn't want to worship. He doesn't believe in worshiping. So the husband comes, and all he keeps saying to Master is, "I'm hungry. You better make sure we have lunch." Really, there he was, right in the material world. My tummy's hungry. I want lunch. Master sits down, and he's meditating and meditating. The experience is beautiful. He has a vision of Kali, who represents Divine Mother. Kali just keeps growing in his vision. Such a deep and profound experience. As soon as he comes out of it, the brothers on him. "You see, I told you, now we're hungry. Now the lunchtime is over," because there were times. Just then, one of the priests from the temple comes out. And again, it's so beautiful. We hear these stories a lot, but to really absorb the beauty of it. So he comes out and he says, I saw you meditating. I saw you praying. I felt how deep you were going. So I saved you all a lunch. And of course, in that miracle is the conversion of Roma's husband, because that beauty of God, when God is there, and what it means to get us there, well, it takes your heart away. It just grabs you. That's it. So these miracles that Master allowed to happen, and there are more and more, didn't just transform and convert in the highest way the people in the stories, but for all eternity, for us to keep reading them. You know, this reading that we have today is part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is, I also read the whole Sermon on the Mount again last night. This is why I had so much fun. Frank Laubach's book that's only 36 pages, The Sermon on the Mount, all of these stories in the AY. I'm telling you, there's nothing better to do with an evening. It was joyful. But I read the Sermon on the Mount, and it was so amazing. I'm not gonna read it, and for those of you who have it memorized, you'll notice that I'm skipping around a little. Let me just grab my glasses so I can see what time it is. Oh dear. I'm sorry. Let me just say this about the sermon. This is another day-long workshop, so come to it. It's beautiful because there's 33 little sayings that come at first, the Beatitudes, which we all know. But then in all these different ways, Christ keeps saying to people, to his disciples, his main disciples who came up the hill, and he says, I'll just tell you one. He says, when you pray, he said, don't pray like so many of the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say unto you, they have received their reward. What is their reward? They were seen by others. They worship lesser gods. They got it. He said, but when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And then he goes on and he gives them right then the Lord's Prayer. He talks about it about the way we eat. He talks about it about money in beautiful ways. The same thing. He says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. That's where this comes from. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. He's saying to the disciples, look how easily money goes. Doesn't mean anything. It might not be worth the paper it's printed on in a bit. Somebody might steal it from you. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves cannot break and steal. And he says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve, Jesus' words, you cannot serve God and money. Now, I can't keep going through it, but it's just like that. It's an expansion of this teaching. So let me just close by reading the last thing I wanted to read from Frank Laubach, because this really summarizes in a beautiful way everything about this journey, everything about how much strength it takes, how much courage, how hard it is, the faith we have to have. But then he says so beautifully the rewards, what those rewards feel like. So I'll just end with this. He says, as I analyze myself, I find several things happening to me as a result of 2 months of strenuous effort to keep God in mind every minute. And he means it. He winds up getting there. But he says, this concentration upon God is strenuous, for sure, but everything else has ceased to be so. Yeah, it's hard work, but here's what happens. I think more clearly, I forget less frequently. Things which I did with strain before, I now do easily and with no effort whatsoever. I worry about nothing, and I lose no sleep. I walk on air a good part of the time. Even the mirror reveals a new light in my eyes and face. I no longer feel in a hurry about anything. Everything goes right. Each minute I meet calmly, as though it were not important. Nothing can go wrong excepting one thing. That is, that God may slip from my mind, and if I do not keep on my guard, if he is there, the universe is with me. My task is simple and clear. God bless you all. Listen.
of song.